Hey guys, welcome back to my garage again with the 959 Panigale Corse. This time around we're gonna change the rear set. We're gonna replace the OEM with some Rizoma rear set, which look fantastic. But enough with the chit chat, let's get on it. We're gonna start with the right hand side, the brake side. Now, because those are Rizoma and they're specifically made for the 959 Panigale, there should be no fabrication involved and they should go just in. It's a straight installation. Now, the only thing I want to make sure before I begin, first of all, you need a medium thread lock for some of the screws. And also you're gonna need some grease because this is aluminum, and when you tie the screws down, the screw need to rotate, slide on the aluminum pretty good, otherwise you're gonna scratch it. That's why Rizoma recommends to use some grease. And the grease is not supposed to go on the thread itself, it's supposed to go on the head of the screws. Now, one thing I wanna do before I start taking stuff apart, because I wanna keep the geometry as close as possible to OEM before I feed it to the owner of the bike, I want to make sure that the peg is going to be here as close as possible to this position. Therefore, I'm going to measure up how far the peg is from the ground and I'm going to write it down. And then I want to also measure the distance between the peg and something that is going to be steady on the bike, and in this case the clutch cover over here. And then another thing I want to measure, because on the Rizoma you can adjust the distance for the brake pedal, I'm going to measure how far this brake pedal is from the peg. I'm going to try to do the whole installation without removing the fairing of the bike. I really don't want to. Worst case scenario, we'll try to take off the bottom side, but let's start taking the pegs apart, and I'm gonna get rid of the heel guard first to give myself some space. Next step is gonna be to remove the pump over here. And let's see if we can get rid of that. Let's put it aside. Well, it turns out that because they're torqued down so much, and obviously with thread lock on it, I can't quite reach it well enough to apply enough pressure. So at this point I'm gonna have to remove this and actually loosen up the bracket over here, which I didn't want to do, but it is what it is. Let's get on it. At this point, we're gonna pull out the whole assembly. Once the assembly is out, it's only kept in place by this the rear light switch. So we're gonna remove that. Now that I have this apart, I'm gonna go to the vise, put this on the vise and remove those two bolts. So let's start taking these apart, all of it, because to have enough room to access those two screws over here, I have to remove the lever itself and this little bracket here. The bracket is simple enough, I think. There you go. I move it aside, so now I have a straight shot at getting in there. And the next one is the lever over here. Another piece is off, and at this point, finger crossed, number 2 is out. One last thing you need to remove from the brake pedal is the spacer over here, the screw that gives you the space for the switch. So I'm gonna pull it off, and this is gonna get installed on the new Rizoma. We can go back to the bike. Okay, it's time to put the bracket back on and remove everything I wanted to remove from it. So this one is gonna go back in. Just to be safe, I'm gonna put a drop of thread lock on it. Okay, at this point it's time to torque. Those two are torqued at 25. This one is torqued at 6. Mind you, I got those numbers online, so be careful and double checking them for yourself. So my torque wrench does not beep that far down, but you can just set it up and just look as the numbers go up because it starts from 0. Next up, we're gonna install the bracket from the Rizoma plates, and for this one Rizoma actually calls for some medium thread lock. So Rizoma puts Teflon washers on those two bolts. The thing got me thinking though, because 25 Newton meters is gonna squish those Teflon washers pretty good, and the OEM and no washers there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove them and torque it down to OEM specs. Before we take the rear set and go put it on the bike, there are a few things that we need to add to it beforehand. One being on the bottom down here is the adjustment nut for the brake light. So another thing we need to do is get the plunger from here and put it on the Rizoma plate. Now the Rizoma plate, the Rizoma rear set, does not need the spring because the spring is actually built into the rear set. As always, I'm gonna try to keep it at OEM height and put it in there. Other than that, everything is installed on the new rear set, and what's not installed can be installed once the rear set itself is on the bike. So let's go put it on the bike. So it's now time to add to the rear set the sensor, the switch for the rear brake light, and also the brake master cylinder over here. So let's start with this because we're gonna have to rotate the cable. At this point it's time to attach the brake pump to it. Get the plunger back into the pump. Before we put those in, I'm gonna put a little bit of grease on the head of the screw. It seems like that if you want the pegs to be at the same height as the OEM, you have to use the uppermost bolt holes on the peg, and that keeps this part to the ground at 16 inches. Now, this 16 inches only applies to this bike right now in this situation, because if you have a different height rear stand, obviously it's gonna be more or less. So don't take the 16 inches and use it on your own. It's gonna change whatever the OEM used to be. Thread lock. The Rizoma instruction called those to be torqued between 22 and 24 Newton meters. We're gonna go with 23, right in the middle. But before I do that, I'm gonna put all the screws back onto the fairing because we're done with it. So Rizoma doesn't really give you torque specs for this, because I'm assuming because the nut is self-locking, so I'm just gonna hand tie it to what I think is good. Next thing I need to do is remove this play by extending this thing in the back. So you just unscrew it a little bit until you get the play out of it. With this little bit of play, you're sure you're not applying any pressure on the pump, and at the same time you're not that far away from it, so there is no real play, it's just a little bit. Next thing you need to address is the play for the brake light switch over here, and Rizoma recommends between half to 1 millimeter. It's time now to put the peg back in. So the way you go at it is big black spacer, red spacer, and then the peg. Let's put this in, and in it goes. There you go. The thread lock is going to keep it in place. And next up, we're going to put the cap on. Now that everything works properly as it's supposed to, I'm going to have the owner hop on and I'm going to adjust it for his feet. How does it feel?
Feels awesome.
Try to put tip of the boot on the peg, like if you're in a lean. There you go. How does it feel?
Better. Much better.
Okay, then we're done. Since the right hand side is on and it seems to be working well for the owner of the bike, let's move on to the left side. The left side, I really do not want to remove the attachment plate over here because it's a giant job. So I'm gonna start taking stuff apart little by little. I try to see if there is an easy way to do this. Unfortunately, most people that install rear set on this bike, they just show you, it's here, it's not here anymore. So I'm not quite sure. I think it's gonna be hard, but well, let's start taking stuff apart and see where we go. We're gonna start with the easy bits, which are the heel guards. Moving on, I'm gonna get the shifter lever here. When you remove the shifter lever, do not apply force to the shifter itself. Hold the lever and apply force from the Allen key to the lever itself. You don't want to push against your quick shift. So just like that, you just pinch it. And this is out. It's now time to tackle those two bolts, which in theory they're torqued to 25 Newton meters, but it feels like a lot. Make sure that the X key is all the way inside the bolt, because otherwise you're gonna either strip the bolt or bend the X key if you don't have the full surface. There you go. I'm much happier when stuff comes off. Didn't quite wanna undo this, but I guess there is no way around it. Once you lose it up, you can actually twist this, and now I have access to it. I believe the Rizoma have their own bolt. That has to come out. I guess I'm gonna need the help of the tool of 1,000 uses. Italian plumber best friend. Plumber pliers. Boom. Told you. First thing to put back in is the bracket where the Rizoma rear set are gonna plug in. And those as well are set to 25 Newton meters. So over here we need to put the Rizoma gear shift into here, and as you guys can see, the bolt is in the back. Somehow maneuver so that I can attach this to it. Here we go. Once it's attached, we're gonna tie it to spec and move on. Once you guys have that tied, I'm gonna set it up just like the one on the other side. So I'm gonna use the upper holes. Okay. Before you tie anything, you might want to make sure that the up and down on the shifter, it does not touch anything. The length seems to be right. The only thing I need to do is the nut in the back, I need to tie it. Now it's tied, and time to put on the peg. I guess that is it. The only thing I need to do is make sure that all the other screws that I didn't touch are tight. So now the only thing I need to torque are those that go as well at 22 to 24, therefore 23 Newton meters. So as you guys can see, the prong over here for the shifter lever hits dead center on the protective patch on the boots. That's exactly where it's supposed to be when the peg is by the heel. So very good. I guess you have very standard feet. And that's it. We're good. Moving on. The installation wasn't too difficult. You do need to have the right tools because most of those bolts are really tight in there. So that was the hardest part of it all. It was just try to remove those bolts. Other than that, the bike looks a million times better. According to the owner, which you guys have seen on top of it, he says those are super grippy on his boot. They're about $700 worth of rear set. It's quite up there, but if you have the money to spend, absolutely, because they really look incredible. But for anything you've seen in this video, including my trustful torque wrench, check the description down below. Remember to support the channel. You can find a support link in the description below or on the home page of my YouTube channel. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this installation. I'm going to try to make it as short and to the point as possible. If you like the video, like. If you love the video, subscribe. Right on, and I'll see you next time.